are we talking about when we talk about youth empowerment?
You want to take that?
I think it's a very, very loaded topic. There's a lot that goes into it. As far as the work that I do personally in youth empowerment, I think culture is tied into it, families. I really believe in the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it's not just one central thing that we do or can utilize to empower youth. It's a whole community's job to uplift our youth. I believe in the saying, lift as we climb. So making our communities better will eventually lead to getting our youth on track and finding efficacy within themselves to bring that positive change.
Lift as we climb kind of implies that we're climbing. And as we climb, we can lift.
Yep.
Anthony?
For me, youth empowerment has to do so much with knocking down the barriers that youth have, but also giving youth and being really transparent in that development that there are barriers, and to really recognize them and to find and foster solutions for themselves. My hope is that one day all of the energy and the work that I'm doing is instilled into youth in their own way, and that they can see and explore solutions for themselves.
Well, Anthony just now kind of mentioned barriers several times. When you think of young people, do you ordinarily think of barriers? What barriers? Before you answer that, Anthony, let me ask Renee.
I think there are a lot of barriers as far as, I think, youth voice. Where is youth voice present? Especially in policy making and in the schools and maybe even family structures. Having that youth voice, and I think having that voice and being empowered are definitely tied, and I think there are a lot of barriers that youth face that prevent them from being advocates for themselves in their communities, whether the community is the family, the classroom, or where they live.
Well, when you mentioned youth voice, I immediately thought of music. Do they have a voice in music?
I think they use music as a tool to have that voice. There's a lot of music that they can connect with and say, this is a song that I feel like represents me or says something that I feel like I can't say. But I think there's also a lot of youth who want to put their talents into music. I have a lot of youth who are poets who want to produce beats and write raps, and it's all positive stuff, but where's the platform for that? So there's another barrier right there, where they don't have the platform to showcase these talents. So hopefully we can create these spaces for youth that will break those down.
You mentioned barriers. Were those the barriers that you were thinking of, or what barriers did you have in mind?
A lot of the youth that I work with come from incarceration, or a lot of youth are first generation. A lot of youth are also immigrants, so they have structural barriers that are going on in their community that they were born into, or they were in as a consequence of an action that they made a few years back, and so they are now dealing with these consequences, and they're completely different than they were 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and so
the youth are different, or the consequences are different?
The youth are different. They're no longer the youth that got in trouble 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
But they're still youth.
But they're still youth, yes.
They were in, like, some of them in juvenile hall.
Yes. And so they come through our programs, and they learn all of these new ideas, and they learn these different concepts, and so they're growing as we all are growing up. And the barrier for that is the stigma that's embedded with them, and how they have to first destigmatize their own self, and then also what images and what things go on in our community that reinforce that stigma, and then the environment that they live in might not necessarily be positive. Or
so we're talking about specific youth. We're not talking about youth in the general community, are we?
No.
Not at all.
So you're talking about youth in poor communities?
I'm talking about youth in underserved communities, talking about youth in different cultural communities as well. A lot of youth are youth of color, so it's very different than another youth in, say, Hillsborough or in Burlingame.
Sure. So how do you, what are the steps that you take when you talk about empowering youth?
I think for me, the first step is being able to talk about our role in communities, or specifically the youth's role in community. And we do a lot around how do we define community? Where do we stand in community, and what are our identities? And like Anthony mentioned, a lot of the youth come from families who may have immigrated here from another country, or whose parents are incarcerated, or the child themselves have been through the juvenile justice system. So understanding that this is a part of them, that it's not something that they should shun away or hold down, because that's a part of them, and that there's a power behind accepting those pieces of themselves. So I think the community building, and also the acceptance of their identity, and the acceptance and storytelling of their past and their present.
Are we talking about a lot of youth?
The youth that I work with, we have about 25 youth that rotate in a semester or so, and it's also not a set time that they're here. Like, some youth come and they haven't been part of the program for like the last 3 years, but they still want to be connected. So it's a very fluid number of youth that are interacting. But you were mentioning storytelling, and a lot of the work that we're doing is really honoring the stories that youth come from. There was an intern a week ago who did a presentation. He's Nicaraguense, and he wanted to really highlight his upbringing and connect that with other youth that are from Mexico and other youth that are Tongan, because there's this value when you are owning your background and you are acknowledging what you offer and bring to the table. Then other youth are going to see, oh, I want to be just like that, or I can relate to you.
Well, do you know, I was going to ask you, since Renee had mentioned it, not shunning the background, but using it. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. You said there's power. What's the power? So let us say you were in juvenile hall. Mm-hmm. Or let us say you come from an immigrant background. What's the power that you're asking these young people to use, to pull upon?
Well, I myself come from a family of immigrants. I'm a first-generation Filipino-American, born and raised in the Bay Area, and I realized that for me, there were a lot of barriers for me growing up to get to college, even when I was in college, and I could have easily felt very discouraged by those barriers.
Barriers like what?
Financial barriers, language barriers, my parents not understanding the educational system or the financial aid system, so not knowing how we can pay for college or how to even help me fill out my college applications or what it would take to get into college. And it wasn't until college that I realized there was a power in the storytelling and acceptance of my own culture and my identity, because there's a struggle there. And for me to be where I'm at, whether it's a woman of color in higher education, or whether it's my students who have gotten out of juvenile hall, are currently on probation but back in school, there's a power in that.
What's the power?
The fact that you can persevere, the fact that you are not held back, you are not defined by what you've been through in the past, that there is always room to move forward, to lift as we climb, and that there is always more to strive for, and that I'm honoring my past by knowing that there is more for me out there.
And I see another thing in that is that there's resilience, and there's people that are, their background may not be a traditional college student, like coming with like 2.5 family, and like they have all this income and all of that. And so there's power in taking up space, that their identity, that their background, that who they are as a person, they're taking up space in an academic situation. And that also doesn't say that they're the representative of that group, or they're being tokenized, that they're the only person of color in like the business school. It's just that they are taking up space because they have every right to be there and have that journey to get through to college.